greatest pieces of architecture, for example, some of the greatest pieces are great churches, right? Great mosques, great temples. And they've been constructed as a result of a religious inspiration and then also a scientific knowledge. Without the scientific knowledge, you can't put those buildings, those architectural pieces together. So these are such essential, you could say, two important forces in the world, that it's very important to see what the relationship between the two are. As human beings, it's very difficult for us to live without some sort of belief system, sort of, you could say, viewpoint or belief system about the nature and origin of the world. And it's also very difficult for us to act in this world or to avoid the powers of science. Right? Science works, therefore it is powerful. I take a plate of food and I put it in the microwave. It comes out very hot. You also take a plate of food, you put it in the microwave, it'll also come out very hot. So science is powerful because it works. And both of these are extremely, you could say, influential, powerful forces that influence our perspective on the world. In fact, they're important that in recent years you find there's actually been court cases in America over the relationship between science and religion. Can anyone describe to me or identify a court case that took place regarding the relationship between science and religion? Not very recently, but in the recent years.
Is it about the black hole?
Not that I know of. It has to do with the origins of the universe and human beings.
Is it about Stephen Hawking?
The Scopes.
Maybe that. Huh?
Scopes trial.
What was that relating?
The Scopes trial or the monkey trial?
Yes. Very good. The famous court cases that took place in America were over evolution versus intelligent design. That various scientists who were or are very religious were arguing, why should we not teach intelligent design science class? Why only teach evolution in science? This is a very hot topic, and it's such an important topic that at a certain point they decided to start an entire master's degree in this topic at Oxford University. So 2 years before I studied there, they started a master's program in science and religion, and that's what I ended up studying. Because I grew up in a very religious family. You could say just devout family, not very religious, but devout family. Yet I spent my bachelor's and my master's studying science and engineering. So I was very interested to look at the relationship between the two. What is the relationship between scientific, you could say, knowledge and religious belief? So having said this and looking at the importance of this topic, we can maybe make a few points regarding this. And then I'll open it up for questions and discussion, because that's the fun part when we discuss this. So I guess I'll start with a question. I'll start first with a question, and that is, religion is so widespread. There's so many religious beliefs around the world, so many religious people. In fact, who can say what percentage of the world is religious? What do you think? 5%, 10%? What percent of the world is religious?
80%?
Say it a bit louder.
74?
Yes, very good. 84%. Yes, 84% of the world's population is religious. This means about 6 billion people of the world have a religious faith that they ascribe to, that they say they belong to. So 84% of the world is religious. And if you are religious, then there's so many, you could say, rules and regulations that come around with at least most religious traditions. If you're religious, you eat only certain items. Like if you're Hindu, for the most part, you're supposed to have a vegetarian diet. If you're Jewish, you only eat kosher. You have to go to church every Sunday if you're Christian, spend a few hours there, perhaps give a tithing, a percentage of your income. So being religious is sometimes inconvenient, right? And there's so many rules and regulations that go along with it. Even for just you could say, a very moderate religious life. What to speak of a very strong religious life, like becoming a monk? Then you have to virtually give up all your worldly pleasures, lead a life of austerity and penance. So 84% of the world is religious, and it's a pain to be religious, right? And I am saying this somewhat as a joke. It's not really a pain, but one could sort of consider it that way. Yet religion continues to exist. Since thousands of years, ever since sort of we know the origins of human beings, there's been some sort of religious practice or system in place. And to this day, in virtually every part of the world, there's some sort of religious practice taking place. So it continues to exist, and to the, you could say, surprise of many socialists and sociologists, it continues to expand as well. It continues to thrive, even in the modern world, when we have so much access to, you could say, alternate forms of knowledge. So the question is this. The question is that religion is a very common phenomenon. It requires quite a bit of commitment, and it's very, very widespread. And so why does religion exist? If religion is, you could say, inconvenient, it requires so much of a commitment, then why does it continue to be so popular in the world? And why does it exist with such force? Can anyone say, why does religion exist? Richard Dawkins, a famous Oxford biologist who's also the Oxford professor for the public understanding of science, he believed that, with the rise of science, when people have an alternate worldview, religion would fade away very quickly. And he's surprised that it still hasn't. And so this question is also perhaps on his mind as well. Why does it continue to exist? Regardless if it's true or not, but what might be the motivation? Back there's a hand in the back of the table.
So, because you want to believe in something, if there's no religion, like everything becomes void, life becomes meaningless.
Okay. So your response is for the purpose of meaning.
Yeah, a meaning of life. If it's not there, then it becomes void. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Are you in the earth, right? I mean, everything becomes like not philosophically void. No.
Okay. Excellent response. If you're not religious, then you could say it appears that you are in a pointless and purposeless universe. Yes. And then after death, you just turn into mulch, right? This is one philosopher, he famously said that, okay, so it might exist because of a drive. There's some sort of drive in human nature to search for meaning and to search for purpose. Very good. Any other suggestions?
You search for happiness.
Okay, the search for happiness. Very good. This is, of course, a controversial one because Richard Dawkins, he says, in fact, religion is the root of all evil, right? Far from giving people happiness, it puts restrictions on you. Although I agree with your point, I had actually two professors that I knew. One was Richard Dawkins. I never actually studied under him, but I attended some of his lectures. And another one was Keith Ward. Keith Ward was he was the professor of divinity in the School of Religious Studies. So obviously he believed in God. And Richard Dawkins was a very committed atheist. He did not. And one of the things that I and other students observed is that Keith Ward was a very happy person. He was always joking and things like that. And Richard Dawkins, although he does laugh and smile at times, but we would sometimes see him riding his bike down the streets of Oxford, but he always had a very stern face, and he seemed very angry and kind of miserable. So perhaps religion has something to do with happiness. And there's certain studies also showing a connection between happiness and religious belief, and how the two are lead to one another to some degree. Okay, but of course there's other ways to be happy as well. So happiness alone may not be a satisfying response to our question.
Can I say something?
Huh?
Can I say something?
Yes.
I feel that a lot of things in the world are out of our control, and when things go out of our control, we tend to get very distressed. So at that time, like religion is what gives the emotional strength. I feel that a lot of people are able to handle difficult circumstances in a better way because of that religious belief that they have. So that's probably one of the reasons why people believe in religion.
Okay. So it helped. From what I couldn't pick up everything you said. If you are also having difficulty hearing me, please let me know and I will slow down. So this is for everyone there. I'm on this side. The internet connection might be unstable. So just let me know if I need to slow down or speak more clearly. From what I understood you saying, you said that religion is a means which helps us to cope with different situations in life. Gives us a perspective on it, right? Helps us understand suffering. Okay, very good. This is close to also what I'm also thinking. So, very good responses. All of you have presented absolutely reasonable and true reasons as to why religion exists. Now, if we look back into the lives of the great religious teachers and also thinkers and philosophers, we'll find one reason, which is the most, you could say, forceful reason as to why religion exists. And that is because of the phenomena of temporality, because of the existence of time and temporality. Because the life is temporary and because the world is temporary, this serves as one of, you could say, the strongest motivations for philosophy, not just religion, but also philosophical pursuit and religious pursuit. And quite interestingly, if this is indeed the case, which we'll talk about, then what that means is that the basis of religion, or the basis of faith, is something that really does not require faith. It's something that is very evident, you could say, obvious before our eyes, that we can see just by our own empirical vision and understanding. The simple fact that life is temporary. When I observe the world or when I look at myself, I know that there's an end to life. There's a beginning and there's an end. And it's that simple observation that does not require faith that most often leads to people having faith. For example, if we look back, for example, in the life of Immanuel Kant, how many of you have heard of Kant? Yes. He's a great Western philosopher, one of the biggest names in Western philosophy. Now, growing up as a young kid, he was not interested in philosophy. He was just, having fun, leading a somewhat normal life. And then one fine day, he is walking down the road and he finds, excuse me, he looks around at himself and what does he see? He finds that everything in the world is changing. That the world is in constant change, constant flux. And this observation bothers him a little bit. He looks at it and he says, nothing sticks with me. Everything, whatever I point at, it changes. Either it changes immediately and it's obvious, or it changes and it's not obvious, but it does change in a minute way. And when he saw this, then the natural question that came up to him was that if this world is constantly changing, and if it's the world of change, then what is it behind it that does not change? What's beyond it that is changeless? And so it was this burning question that would not leave him. He writes in his own diary that it sort of bothers him and you could say bugs him, that transforms him into a philosopher. He begins to question the world, right? This point of purpose or meaning. That observation of the temporality of the world and the existence of change led him to search for meaning and to search for that does not change. And then what happens, he comes up with this philosophy of phenomena and noumena. You might have heard of this as well in his philosophy. This is sort of at the very core of Kantian philosophy, that the world that we see around us is all phenomena, and behind it is what? Noumena, which he believed was a changeless thing behind the phenomena that never changes. And that because he was a philosopher, not exactly religious, he believed that there was something changeless behind it, but you could not know that changeless thing. You could never know what the noumena is. You could only experience and know the phenomena. But still, the point is that we live in the world of phenomena, he believed. And this is why the world continuously changes, and behind it is something that is changeless, but according to him, unknowable. So here's one of the greatest philosophers in the world, in the Western world at least, who studied the most by college students around North America and the rest of the world. And the beginnings of his, you could say, philosophical inquiry begin with this simple observation that the world is temporary and requires change. Because if we think about it, why would we undergo a philosophical pursuit or religious pursuit if we were eternal? That is, our existence in this world is eternal. If our stay in this world is eternal. Why would we search for meaning and purpose if this is the world that we know? We search for meaning and purpose because we weren't here at a certain point. Now we're suddenly here. And after some time, we won't be here. So now we're thinking, oh, what's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of my existence here? If this is the only existence we would ever know, then, well, this is all it is. This is the world that we have. But it's the phenomenon of temporality that drives us to find purpose and meaning in this world. It's the phenomenon of temporality that leads to suffering most often, and that drives us to search out for the meaning and purpose of suffering. Right? Why does suffering exist in this world? To give you another example now, we talked about Kant. On the Eastern world, the famous teacher and saint Buddha, right? This was one of his first observations. He had what they say the 4 passing sights. And Buddha is born as a very, you could say, wealthy and handsome and powerful prince. And he has no reason to become a monk or a religious person. But suddenly, at the age of 20, he has an immense transformation in his life. He becomes a changed person. He runs away from home and becomes a mendicant. Why? Because he goes to the city for the first time in his life. And the Buddhist tradition explains, what does he see? He sees birth. He sees old age. He sees disease. And he sees death. And because he sees these things, he then starts to question, okay, what is the meaning of life? Why am I here? And he undergoes a lifelong spiritual pursuit about enlightenment. Right? In the same way, we find in the Vedic tradition, the sages, they characterize the world by a certain term. And that's, so you could say, the starting point of looking at understanding the world. And that word is called samsara, right? That the world is described as a cycle of samsara. Now this word samsara comes from the Sanskrit root srij, which means to flow. Flow like a river flows. And so what they argue is that the world is something like a river that continuously flows. It flows without any stoppage. And we are like, you could say, twigs in that river that are flowing down this river of life. So the world is not like earth, something stable, but actually is something like a river, which is constantly changing and is constantly flowing. So we across the globe, we find that the initial, you could say, awakening happens when we, in an empirical way, in a very realistic way, we observe the nature of the world. And it's based upon that honest and very rigorous observation of the world that the world's religious traditions move forward. So here already we are seeing a relationship between reason and belief, right? Science and religion. That the two are deeply intertwined with one another. Religion is not existing, you could say, in outer space, but rather deeply, you could say, connected. It's when we look at the nature of the world, then we find something in the nature of the world that raises questions, that requires answers. And then religion becomes simply a means, one of the many different means that we have in this world to find a solution or resolution to that question. It's the same question that every religious tradition in the world is trying to respond to. And not just religious tradition, but it's also the same question that science is trying to respond to. The question is the same, but the approach or the means of trying to respond to that question is what changes. Religion is trying to respond to it in one way, and science is responding to it in another way. But it's also trying to respond to that same question. So I'll just give you one example of how science is approaching this issue of time. And then I'll open it up for discussion. But I think this example is very, you could say, telling and is very unique. Because also there's some of you mentioned black holes. I think some of you are a little bit into physics, so might as well we can talk about this. And one of you mentioned Stephen Hawking also, right? So one of the, you could say, most ongoing prominent theories in physics is the Big Bang cosmology. Right? Big Bang cosmology is the sort of widespread accepted cosmology in physics. And sort of the new physics, the latest physics, has been looking into the Big Bang cosmology. And one of the things that they find is that the world is constantly expanding. Right? Because it's expanding, they believe, well, initially it started from a singular point of infinite density and intensity, and then that point exploded at a certain point in time and produced the world that we see today. So scientists today, they sort of they conjecture that at 10 to the minus 20 seconds after the Big Bang, you had the separation of you could say magnetic forces, and after that 10 to the minus 5 seconds, you had separation of nuclear forces, and then gradually, after 14 billion years, we find ourselves here in the way we find ourselves today. Now, the question that has come up is well, when and where did the Big Bang take place? Very natural question. That when did it take place, and where did it take place? Well, now with not now, but since the time of Einstein's development of his theory of relativity, one thing that Einstein showed is that space and time in the world, that space and time are relative and they exist in the world. And based upon your position and your place in the world, space is different and time is also different. So time is relative and space is also relative. To give you an example, if I'm traveling on a rocket near the speed of light, I will experience space in a very different way than someone else. For me, because I'm traveling on that speed, space will actually shrink, and I will experience less of a distance than someone who is not traveling so fast. In the same way, if I look down on Earth, people who I see to be 6 feet tall will only appear 3 feet tall to me because of the position in space that I'm in and the speed that I'm traveling. Also, the time that I experience will also be different. And the fact that time is relative is something that is shown very regularly. They've placed an atomic clock. If you place an atomic clock on a 100-story building and one on the ground, then after a few days, if you bring the atomic clock down on ground, then you'll find that the clock on the 100th story of a building has experienced 0.001 second less than the clock on the ground. Not 0.0000001 second less than the clock on the ground. You get the point. It's experienced less time than the clock on the ground, which means that time travels slower the higher up you are. You might have wondered why rich people buy condos on the 100th story. Well, this is why, because they live longer. So you experience less time the higher up you are, because time is related to gravity. If there's less gravity, time travels more slowly, and so you experience less time. So this is something that Einstein showed and has been verified numerous times by physicists today. It's not, you could say, pseudoscience. It is pure solid science. So space and time are relative in the world. If they are relative, then what Stephen Hawking has shown is that when the Big Bang happened, the Big Bang is an explosion of space and time. Right? It is not an explosion in space and time, but it's an explosion of space and time. So we cannot say, or we cannot ask the question, when did the Big Bang happen? Nor can we ask the question, where did the Big Bang happen? Because space and time were produced from the Big Bang. They're not produced before the Big Bang happened. Well, then the question comes up, the natural question is, well, then what is the Big Bang? And, of course we can't ask that question, but what's before the Big Bang? And what is the Big Bang? That is, what is the space of the Big Bang? So this is a very nice question. If the Big Bang produces space and time, then what is it in of itself, or what existed before it? Any suggestions, any thoughts?
There was no timelessness.
Yeah.
Timelessness, okay. Any other thoughts? Well, obviously, like all of you are saying, it must be something that is beyond space and time. Now, if we use this word beyond space and time, which is something, science, Stephen Hawking are convinced of now, that it is something beyond space and time, then if you look at that phrase carefully, then that phrase is just another, you could say, description, or one of the many descriptions or definitions of God. God is something that is beyond space and time. So now science is in search, currently as we speak, scientists and science is in search of some substance or something that is beyond space and time. Now, what's so interesting about this is that although the results or the solutions might be different, but now the search is the same. For religious traditions are also searching for that which is beyond space and time. That is, they're searching for God. Monks in the forest are searching for God. They're searching for something that's beyond space and time. And now science also is searching for something that is beyond space and time. So there's one astrophysicist from Australia. His last name is Jarrow. I forget his first name. And very famous astrophysicist. And he has a very nice paragraph, a very nice phrase that he writes, where he says that that after science has, you could say, traveled over all the various great mountains of learning, and after it has progressed so far, it's finally come to the final cliff, the final edge of knowledge, right? And it looks over that cliff. And what does it find? He says, it finds a band of theologians meaning religious practitioners, religious teachers, thinkers, who have been sitting there since thousands of years asking the very same questions. So the whole scientific search, in some ways almost, turns slightly into a bad dream. Why? Because while we thought that we started with something altogether very different, what we ended up with were the same questions that the religions of the world, doesn't matter which religious tradition you're in, that the religious thinkers, the sages, the mystics have been asking since thousands of years, is what is beyond space and time? Which is the point that we started with also, is that we exist in a world of time. Time limits us in so many different ways. Time controls us. And the pursuit is, well, if it does, then how can I transcend time? How can I move beyond time and in some ways not be controlled or contained by time? So I want to stop at this point and open it up for discussion to hear your thoughts and talk about this further. Any questions or comments? Any thoughts on the relationship between science and religion?
So both fundamentally ask the same question.
Mm-hmm.
The fundamental question is the same, right? Where we lead.
The fundamental question of what is the same?
Of both religion and science, that what's beyond time, right?
Well, a fundamental question of science, yes, is that, which is the same question that religion is deeply interested in, which is, you could say, the fundamental question of religion is, yes, what is beyond time? What is beyond space and time? But what's interesting is that science now, rather than the common, you could say, a perspective that science and religion are in conflict, what's very interesting is that now science and religion are in dialogue. And in fact, they are in dialogue because now science is not, you could say, discouraging religious belief, but in some ways it's actually affirming it by saying that, well, we may not be able to answer that question, but it is showing that there is something beyond space and time. There's something beyond matter. And that was even before the Big Bang, you could say, in the very idea of antimatter. What is antimatter essentially saying? It's just saying stuff that we don't, is not tangible, that we can't know about, but that we know exists. And I think they say something like 90% of the universe is antimatter. Someone might know. So science is in dialogue with religion, not based upon what it does not know, but rather based upon what it does know. As science progresses, based upon what it knows, it's showing that, well, there is something beyond space and time, beyond matter, that is not tangible, that is not knowable. It used to be that religious belief was often based upon what is known as the God of the gaps. That, oh, I must be religious because there's a gap in scientific knowledge. Science can't show how life exists or how life is created. Therefore, I must believe in God. Well, the problem with that approach was that the smaller the gap became, the less your need to be religious, right? Okay, science now explains how the eye is formed through an evolutionary method. So now I don't need to believe in God because I know how that can be formed. Science now explains you could say, how the magnetic forces of the world work. So now that's one less reason to believe in God. So that's a very weak argument. But a stronger argument is that, well, if your faith is based not upon what science does not show, but rather upon what it does show. And the more science advances, it seems to show that, in fact, the world is more than just matter. There is something beyond matter. There's something beyond space and time. Any other thoughts or reflections?
Now the question is, what is science?
What is science?
What is time?
What is time, you said? What is time? Okay, very nice question. What is time? What do you think? Does anyone want to suggest a response? What is time?
Is it a measuring quantity, or is it a quantity which we can't measure, or is it just an illusion? Like, what is it? What is time? Is it according to the spiritual definition or according to the scientific definition, science definition now? Since both are saying it that time is different. So what is time? That's what I want to ask.
So what is time? Yes, so your question is very good. I was curious. Some of our audience members are very quiet. So I was curious if someone would like to suggest a response. We all have experienced it, something that's closest to our heart, right? Because not a moment goes without us experiencing time. So what is time? We we take classes on how to manage time. We take on you could say what else on how to kill time, right? People often answer how do I kill time. So all of these things we deal with it, but what is it? Like you're saying, what is time?
It's a dimension.
It's a dimension. Okay, so that's yet another way to describe it. It's a dimension. What is it?
Like a human perspective for change.
Is a perspective for change. Okay.
No, but as the space and time had collision, the starting of the Big Bang, so that makes time not the dimension in that case.
Well, yeah.
It's a quantity.
It's a quantity. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I want to ask, what is time basically?
Yes. So that's a very good question. And science is based upon, or physics is based upon an area of study called metaphysics. And so that's another point, that how science can't exist in its own vacuum. Science has no meaning without the terms and the words and the substances that we use that science works with, so to say. So the basis of physics is metaphysics. And metaphysics is the study of actual things in this world. So, for example, science tells you a proton plus a neutron plus an electron makes an atom. So that's what physics tells you. But physics doesn't tell you, well, what is a neutron? It describes it. It says a neutron is a positive force. No, it's a neutral force. But what is a neutral force? Well, no one can say. So then metaphysics tries to do this. Well, what is a neutron? What is a proton? So this is actually a very big area of study, and it's sort of the foundations of philosophy. And that's why philosophy and physics are very closely related to each other. And the first philosopher to study this was Aristotle. And he was studying metaphysics and talking about these very things, trying to describe them. And Aristotle came to the conclusion that certain things in this world cannot be described in terms of other things. They're self-evident items. You simply cannot describe it. You cannot know it any further. You describe other things based upon them, but you cannot break it down any further. So let me give you an example. If you have a piece of a table, this very table that you're sitting on, that you're sitting next to, if I ask you, what is this table? Then what would you say? What is this table? What is it?
It's just a matter.
It's matter, okay. Well, describe, what is it made of? Let me put it this way. What is it made of?
And it's made of energy and time.
Don't be so philosophical. What is it? Wood made of? What is the table made of? Oh, I answer the question myself. It's made of wood, right? I say, what is wood? Wood is made up of protons and neutrons, electrons, right? Atoms, like you're saying, matter. Then I say, well, what is an atom made out of? Then you say, well, it's made out of a proton. Then I say, what is a proton made out of? Then you say, well, a proton is a proton. It's a positive force. Like you're saying, energy and time, right? Energy, very good response, actually. So at a certain point, you can break it down. You can describe the table in terms of atoms. and you can describe an atom in terms of protons and neutrons. But there's nothing you can describe a proton and neutron in terms of something else, because it's the smallest thing that you know. So therefore, it is a self-evident entity in this world that just is. It doesn't matter you're religious or you're scientific or you're not. It just, that's what it is. It's an absolute entity. It exists, and that's the way you know it in the same way. The same thing is with time. If you can describe to me time in terms of something else, then you can break it down further. But the thing is, you cannot. Time is simply something that is experienced. It is self-evident. Aristotle said it is a kind of thing. And you may believe or you may not believe, you may have faith or you may not have faith, but any scientist, philosopher, religious person cannot describe time in terms of something else. Time is one of the, you could say, self-evident entities in this world. And therefore, that's what it is. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, he says very clearly, he says, Kalosmi. He says, time I am. And he says, although the world might deny me, he says, I meet every single person, every single entity, an amoeba, an ant, a person. How? In the form of time. Because time is inescapable. And time cannot be broken down in terms of anything else. So Krishna says, I am time in this world. Time is one of the most powerful forces. Time changes everything, but no one changes time. Right? I may change everything around me, but I cannot change the time that's already passed. I cannot change the movement of time. I might be Alexander the Great. I might conquer the world. Or I might be Donald Trump, but I cannot change time. I may influence everyone, but ultimately time will influence me, and one day I will succumb to time. So if we were to define God, and if we had a definition of God, let's say God exists. If God exists, right, then we would define him as the most powerful, as unconquerable. You could say as unchangeable. So if we take these qualities, well, then let's look at time. What are some of the qualities of time? Time changes everything, but time itself is unchangeable. It's inconquerable, right? It's in some ways is all powerful. So therefore, it's no coincidence that Krishna describes that one of the ways I manifest myself in this world is as time. And therefore, time, for one who is, you could say, on the spiritual path, time actually becomes a nice carriage, a wheel, a carriage that brings him forward to his goal. But on the other hand, if we're like an ant, then time can simply crush us. So we also say, well, time crushes everything. And therefore, time is something that is fearful to a person who's not on a spiritual path, who's forgotten his spiritual nature, that he or she is eternal. But one who remembers, who knows that they are eternal, that they're the soul, for that person, time is not crushing them. It is not a matter of fear, but rather God in the form of time becomes a vehicle that carries them forward. Therefore, the first message of the Bhagavad Gita is that we are the soul. We are a spiritual being, that we are eternal, and we are a soul. Because this way we can transcend time. Time affects my body, but it does not affect my soul. Any other questions? Nice questions. Good points.
Darpan, ask more.
Huh?
We are encouraging him to ask more questions.
I see.
Actually,
I see something.
I was learning about the relativity theory and all black hole and all that. I was thinking that Einstein defined energy as energy is a function of mass and E is equals to mc square, and he said that energy cannot be created, cannot be destroyed. Only one form of energy can be transformed into another. And similar to that, it was written in Bhagavad Gita that Krishna was saying that I was never there and I was never created. I can never be, like, it was similar to the energy thing. That's what I was thinking, that like energy is a function of mass and time, so mass is a function of energy and time. That's what I was thinking, trying to prove that.
I see. Very nice. I see. Yes, everything is. That's why, because it's interesting that in the Vedanta Sutra, it says that obviously that God is eternal, right? So by definition, if God exists, God must be an eternal being. And that Aquinas also talks about it, that God is the unmoved mover, that everything moves, but that which is unchanging and that moves everything else is God. So whatever that is, whatever is the unmoved mover, if you keep on going back and you find the unmoved mover, that is God. So someone may call it gravity, someone may call it something else, but virtually they're just describing or saying a synonym for God. So Vedanta Sutta says that God is eternal, but along with God, there are 4 things that are eternal. One of them is us, the souls. So we are also eternal. We are co-eternal with God. And if we are also eternal, God is also eternal, then in what sense is God creator? God is creator in the sense that he maintains us. He is continuously keeping us into existence. This is actually very interesting. Even in Christianity, they oftentimes describe creation in terms of continuous creation. That God creates in the sense that he keeps things in place. So we are eternal, it says. Then the third thing, what is another thing that is eternal? God is eternal, we are eternal. There's now 3 other things that are eternal. Any guesses?
Hope.
Hope?
Hope.
Can someone repeat that? I can't hear it.
He said hope.
Hope is eternal. Very interesting. Okay, so if we exist, then you bring actually an interest, then perhaps hope exists. Okay, what else is eternal?
The relationship with God, our relationship with
Your relationship with God. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, that's an excellent point. If God is eternal and we as a soul are eternal, then the relationship between the two must also be eternal. Very good. What's your name? Your name? Huh?
Gopal.
Upa. Okay. Upa. Nice. So some few people have joined us online. So, okay. The relationship is eternal. Any other thoughts? Look around you. What else is eternal? This relates to your comment that you gave in terms of the transformation of energy. Matter is eternal, right? Matter. So even matter is eternal. Yes, it is constantly transformed, but matter is eternal. So these other points that you mentioned are also very interesting, but just formally, just to describe the different things that the Vedanta Sutta mentions, it says, God is eternal, the souls are eternal, matter or prakriti is eternal. It is transformed, it's created and it's destroyed, but because it's the energy of God, everything related to God also has to be eternal. So matter is also eternal. Another thing that's eternal is something that we've been talking about throughout the class. Can someone mention that?
Time.
Time, yes. So time itself changes things, but time itself is eternal. So the 4th thing that's eternal is called time. And the 5th thing is very much related to what Gupta had mentioned, which is the flow of karma is eternal. So karma itself, karma meaning action and then the reaction are not eternal. But the flow of karma is eternal. Why? Because the soul, as you mentioned, the soul is an active being. It has desires, it has nature, it has qualities. It's not this puff of air in the sky. The soul is a spiritual form. It's an active being. It's a spiritual being. So therefore, the soul is always acting. Even if it's sleeping, it's still acting. It's sleeping. That is, it's sleeping. If it's in the womb, then it's in the womb, it's growing. But the soul is always active. It's never in a state of nothingness. This is one point where you could say Vedic scriptures and Buddhism may disagree. Of course, it depends what school of Buddhism you're in, but there's no state of just being, that you're just existing or there's just being, but you're not living or acting. Because even if I try to not do something, I say, I will not do anything. Well, Krishna says, well, that itself is an act. So therefore he tells Arjuna, it's not possible not to do anything. So these 5 things are eternal. God, the soul. What's the next one? Who remembers?
Matter.
Matter. Then time. Then
Flow of karma.
the flow of karma, the flow of activity. These 5 things are eternal and they always exist in this world. Yes, there's no contradiction there between religion and science. Matter and energy transform into one another and they're continuously transforming, but they're all eternal.
Could you please tell me the difference between flow of karma and karma?
Yes, the Sanskrit word karma just means action. So when you find the word karma, it doesn't necessarily mean the law of karma. It just means action. So there's a verse in the Gita which says, Janma karma chame divyam, where Krishna is saying that my janma, that is birth, and karma, he says, are divyam, are divine. So there, when he's using the term karma, it doesn't refer to the law of karma because he's not under the law of karma. Rather, janma means appearance, so his descent, and karma means action or activity. So karma is not a negative term in of itself. Karma just means activity. Then the law of karma says, if you act in a certain way, then you'll get a certain reaction. So action will lead to a reaction. Very nice.
Prabhuji, I have a question.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this talk. I mean, it was very interesting to know like how science and religion are both looking at the same question. I mean, that is very new to me. So
Thank you.
Very interesting. And I had a question like how you were saying that time is eternal. So, and also matter is eternal.
Can you speak a little louder and into the microphone? I was trying to increase my volume, but it's not going out.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Yeah. So you were saying that matter is eternal, right? So,
Yes.
So if that was the case, then like, I feel that it supports the Big Bang theory that, okay, initially there was something and then, I mean, there was a blast and then the whole world was formed, which is something that I don't believe in, but just saying.
Yes. Well, the thing is that absolutely, actually, Big Bang theory, the theory itself that the Big Bang exists is just a theory regarding how the world comes about. It is not that theory in of itself does not imply whether God exists or does not exist. So in fact, the Big Bang theory supports religious belief. It supports Christian belief, for example, the idea of creation ex nihilo, the idea that God creates the world out of nothing. And it also supports the Vedic viewpoint that God creates the world. That is, that all the worlds are coming out of one source. So the problem is not in the explosion, that everything originates out of the explosion. The issue of discussion, so to say, the question is whether or not that explosion and what happens after that is guided or not. You see? So when we say God creates the world, Lord Vishnu is lying on the causal ocean, and from his breath, when he breathes out, all the universes come out. Then each breath could be, when the universes come out of the pores of his body, then each universe could be being produced from a Big Bang. That's very well possible. But the question just is whether or not behind that Big Bang is an intelligence that is guiding the creation that takes place. Or is that happening out of, random chance? So I don't see a contradiction there. the Big Bang could have taken place. The issue just is that, well, why did this explosion produce such wonderful, beautiful people as yourselves? Why didn't it produce just a big, big soup, as we say? Why didn't it produce spaghetti monsters instead of human beings? Well, the reason why is because there is some guidance there. There is a person behind intelligence. We just recently we visited Yellowstone National Park because I'm in Idaho right now, and Yellowstone is only 6 hours from Idaho. And when you go into this national park, it's so beautiful, so nice. I mean, it's unbelievable how beautiful the canyons are. And then you see this big bison walking around, and then all these deer. It's like they say, picture perfect. And then the more you travel, you feel, and all of them have their relationships. These animals have their communities, their families. There's emotion, there's love, there's music, there's art, there's dance. So then you understand, well, there must be some guidance behind the world, some intelligence behind the world. Otherwise, why are we just like tables and chairs that don't care for their existence, that are not aware of their own existence? So yes, it could definitely have been produced from a Big Bang. God can produce it via Big Bang or via a small bang or via a quiet bang. But the question just is, was there an intelligence behind that bang? Was there some intelligent being? Just like you can construct a house using many different methods, and many different architects can construct it. But yes, you cannot construct a house just by dumping a lot of material there and hoping after some time, if you burn some dynamite there, that after some time that house will develop in of itself. So, good point. Yes.
But what if we assume that like everything existed like before, I mean, if matter is eternal, what if like this intelligently designed creature already existed, but is not formed?
Okay. So, yes, simply using, you could say, the rational approach, we cannot prove that behind the world is some intelligence. That's true. That's absolutely true. But if we are to use the empirical method, then if we are to observe the world, we find that in this world, anything that is, you could say, conscious, is coming from something that is already conscious. So now they can develop a child within a test tube, right? Not a test tube, but a little tube. So, if they have the sperm, then they can put it in a tube and gradually, you could say, develop the child. Although I'm not sure actually if it's really possible. But still, you need that original seed. So our own experience in this world, as you could say, scientist or based upon observation, is that something living always comes from something that is living. So if I'm if I'm an honest scientist, then if that is my empirical understanding and belief, then why should the world, which is a living organism, and why should the people in the world come from something that does not have life? Life always comes from life. That's our experience in this world. It's that scientists today cannot even produce a mother's milk. So they cannot produce milk. They can produce so many things, but a mother's milk is so designed that it's perfect for the child. And the milk will actually be different, they've shown. If the child is a girl, the milk will be different than if the child is a boy. Because the girl needs a different type of milk than the boy. And they need to develop in different ways. And therefore, the mother's milk will be different based upon the gender of the child. And to this day, science has not come close to producing that milk. Yet, we say that no, one day we can produce life out of matter. So yes, it's a post-dated check. And maybe we can produce a very sensitive, loving, spiritual being out of matter. But it's a matter of faith. So your choices, you can either have faith in a scientist who won't exist after 60, 70 years, or we can have faith in you could say, our own experience, which tells us that we're more than just the material things around us. We aspire, as so many of you said, we aspire for something higher. We aspire for love and for eternality. If indeed we were matter, we would be very happy to be destroyed, because that's the nature of matter. Matter is created and destroyed. But the fact that we don't want to die is an argument for the point that we are eternal, that is spiritual. So either we can follow our own experience, or we can just have faith in the empty words of an ambitious scientist. Any other comments or questions? Okay, how about at the table?
I have a comment or a question. I don't know if you could comment on,
Yes.
on the present time. We all know about the importance to live in the present, but by nature we are affected by time, so we tend to go to the past or the future. But
Yes.
can you comment on the importance of being in the present?
Yes. Very nice point. So we know, based upon eternality, that our current life is just like a moment. It's just like a dream in some sense. It comes and it goes. From the perspective of eternality, this life is like a moment. So in some sense, one might say it's not very important. It is temporary, but not very important. But no, it is very important for one reason. The present is very important for one particular reason. The reason being is because our activity in the present, in the purview of time, is what helps us break out of time. So from the viewpoint of eternity, life is not so important because it's less than a moment. But from the viewpoint of eternity, life is very important because it's our activity in this time, at the present, that determines what the future will be. Right now, all of us are creating our future. Right now, in the world of time, we have you could say the option, the possibility of doing things that will allow us to break out of time and transcend time. So therefore, it's so important. So Srila Prabhupada, a great spiritual teacher who commented on many of the Vedic literatures, he said this in a very poetic way. He said that your activity within the dream is what will determine or what helps you break out of the dream. So if life is like a dream, it's temporary, it has an end, it comes and it goes, then the activity within the dream is what will help me break out of the dream. Therefore, the dream is not so important. Like, I might have this dream at night that I'm a prince with 100 horses, and then I lose it. And then I wake up. And then in my dream, I'm crying because I lost all my prince, my best horse, and my position as a prince. But once I wake up, I never cry. I never cry over the dream that, I lost my horses in my dream, and I was such a great prince in my dream, and now I'm unhappy. I don't cry when I wake up. Why? Because it's not so important. I knew, well, it really didn't belong to me to begin with. I had to lose it anyway. I know that once I wake up, I know that, well, since it was a dream, I have to lose it anyway. So the same way in human life, nothing that we do is so important. Nothing is worth to lament over because we're going to lose it anyway. But the reason the way it's different is that if we use this life properly to find the absolute truth, then we can gain, you could say, an eternal benefit from that. On the other hand, if we just use the life for eating, sleeping, defending, and some pleasure, then our life is not very significant because animals are also living that same life. So the present is very important. It's actually the most important is to stay in the present, to use the present in the most meaningful, spiritual, thoughtful way. Because as Prahlad Maharaj says, you can gain everything in this world that you've once lost, but you can't gain the time that you have lost. So if we waste time, as people say, kill time, then we can't gain that back. With all the wealth in the world, we can't gain a moment back. So therefore, the Bhagavatam, therefore, it says, therefore, Athatu Brahma Jigyasa. It says, well, then, therefore, let us inquire into the absolute truth. Let us use this time to break out of this cycle of birth and death and inquire into the absolute truth. It says, therefore, let us use this human form of life, which is so rare, which is so precious. Let us use it carefully. A metaphor that they give is like a boat. When you need to cross the ocean, you need a boat. And once you're on land, the boat is not very important. But the boat is essential if you want to cross the ocean. In the same way, to cross the ocean of material existence and material miseries, we need a very suitable boat. And that boat is the human form of life. Animals and dogs and cats generally cannot have philosophical discussions, as far as I can tell. I have an alligator in my backyard in Florida, I must admit, and as far as I can tell, he enjoys his time in the lake, but he cannot have a philosophical discussion. It's only in the human form of life that we can have these philosophical discussions and realize the world of life. So this human form of life is like a boat which should carry us across to the other end. And it should be utilized and taken care of nicely. Just like a good boat. So, should we stop here? I think my allotted time is up. Unless someone else has a burning question, a comment to make. Yeah, that was the sound of my battery almost running out. No, it still says I have 22 minutes left. So yes, I have a few minutes.
Just a comment to reconcile what you said. When you were discussing about electrons and neutrons and protons, let me reconcile that. This is not my original idea. I have someone else, by the way.
Okay, I need you to speak a little louder and slowly, just because of the camera. It's a bit far from you.
I'm trying to reconcile two different ideas which came from your talk. And reconciliation is not my original thought.
Okay.
I've heard someone else say that. When you were discussing about electrons and protons, for example, the characteristic is that they are not stationary. They move around the nucleus of an atom.
Yes.
Right? Now, Newton's law, for example, which is universally accepted, is that any object cannot remain which is in motion, used to be in motion unless external force is applied. Any object that is stationary will continue to be stationary unless external force is applied. So who is that providing that force for electrons and protons to move around the nucleus, an atom? That is where, I forget, it was Rigveda or Upanishad, that says that every speck has the grace of Bhagwan in it. And you were talking about movable and unmovable. It's unmovable that is actually moving every single atom and every single electron. So
yes, very nice point. Because see, with Newton's law, so it kind of goes both ways. What you're saying, because with Newton's law, that things that stay in motion, things that are in motion, stay in motion unless there's an external force that is applied. One could make the argument, well, no power is needed because that's just the nature of the world. Electrons that are already in motion are going to stay in motion. Going back to our Big Bang cosmology idea, what Big Bang cosmology is saying is the world did have a beginning. At a certain point, it was not there, and then it began at a certain point. So Newton's law cannot apply there. It's not that the universe has always been there and therefore stays there, or it's not that the universe was in a certain place and therefore just stayed in that place, but rather it began. So this is actually known as the Kalam argument, which says that it essentially says that the general cosmological argument says that anything that is you could say anything that is designed should have a designer, right? But this has been argued against various people that, well, it could just have been that way to begin with. You see, the world is designed because it just is that way. But what the Kalam argument says is that, well, no, if something began at a certain point, then it must have an external cause that began it. For example, if, let's say, we have this bottle on the table, like this steel bottle that you see there in front of you. And that it's possible this steel, or is it steel or what is it? A thermos. It's a thermos there. That thermos had always been there since the beginning of time. So you don't require an explanation. Well, where did that thermos come from? Well, it's just always there. You say, where does God come from? Well, it's just always there. So sure, that's then if God does not require an explanation, then the thermos does not require an explanation, because we say, well, God has always been there, so I can just say, well, the thermos has always been there. No problem. But if I say that the thermos is there, but then suddenly, let's say, sorry, what's your name? The lady in the white t-shirt?
Claudia.
Claudia. So let's say Claudia is sitting there, and suddenly that thermos starts to move. And it moves towards the back of the room, and the lady who's sitting there in the back, like this, right? And right next to her, and it moves there. Well, then you're going to think, oh, there's something eerie in this room, something mystical. It must be a ghost. And immediately they say, the ghost moved it. Why? Because it was at a state of rest, and it suddenly began to move. So in the same way, an argument regarding the Big Bang cosmology is that, well, if it began at a certain point, then something had to move it or change it, because it was not already in a state of motion. It was at a state of rest, and now it's in a state of motion. So it's a point which is slightly different than yours, I guess, as a sort of contrast, but you raised a very good issue. And yes, your point is also very nice, that the power behind all of these things is ultimately the power of God. Okay, so I think we will end at this point. It's been truly a pleasure to be with all of you for this past hour. We had a very nice discussion, and hopefully sometime in the future our paths will cross again.